welcome to episode 48 of New Indian Woman podcast, airing first in second half of August 2021, and I'm your host Krishna. This episode also marks the second birthday of New Indian Woman podcast. Thanks to all of you listeners for your encouraging response to this podcast. Today's episode is part 2 of the discussion with Mohinish Sinha from Deloitte India. In part 1, we examined the findings from a recent survey undertaken by his organization around women's experience at workplace. Mohinish Sinha is a partner and leader diversity and inclusion at Deloitte India with 25 plus years experience. Plus, he is also the first male guest on this podcast. Listen to part 1 to know more about what organizations are doing to improve the workplace atmosphere or culture, to give equal, not just opportunities, but also equal experience for women, the future of work from home, etc. We stopped at this question. Do you think there will be more options for women especially? So I am referring to the famous Sheryl Sandberg's book of Leaning In, where women, actually the problem is that they want to lean into work at some points of time. They want to lean into their home related responsibilities at certain points of their life, right? And do you see organizations becoming more and more open to this and facilitating training and mentorship, not just for women, but also for men around, in terms of this is a new culture that Indians will have to figure out. Indians, especially because our notions or social norms are different. So, do you see any kind of training, mentoring, and schemes being identified in this area?
Yes, indeed. I think companies have recognized that they need to create a dialogue around this area with their own employees. Very interesting. One of the companies that I know of, they created a podcast around they invited few people to talk about these issues, and that led to quite a few women going back home, sitting down with their spouse and saying, you know what, we need to talk and relook at our responsibilities. One of them actually reported, and I remember this, is that both of them, the spouse and her, and they sat down and they took a list of things that they do at home, right? And the man apparently ran out after the fourth item or the fifth item, and her list went on, to fill the page. And it struck him that how limited time that he's spending, and he's now seeing it, right? Earlier, probably he was out and
Right.
she would be out and so on, and they would not pay attention to what each one of are doing. But now, enclosed in that, they could see. So this is a consequence of an education there. But a bigger thing that is happening as this whole education is that companies have started creating communities at workplace, and these are men and women who are, you could call them as allies to women, right? Who are looking out for their women colleagues and say, hey, I think we need to do some things better than what we are doing. And in that, one dominant thing that people are working on in these communities with the rest of the organization is helping go after the unconscious bias that sits in each one of us, right? And men and women alike, by the way. I mean, I know of women, through these studies, who believe that
Yeah.
whatever it is that's happening to women, it is understandable and it's okay, right? Not from any other thing. It's a bit of a hostage syndrome, I think. But there is a need for this whole calling out the unconscious bias that exists in every dimension of our working. So that's the other thing that we are seeing as a positive side of it. The companies are investing in, and companies are exploring, ways to skill the women to be able to deal with their, to create a well-being. So, I mean, in our organization, for example, we do
Right.
regular rounds of, the usual Zumbas, and, beyond that, to do actual real conversations, where we get a mental health professional to talk to our colleagues We have access to our
Right.
own helplines that people can call to and talk to our counselors. So there is and we are not alone. There are so many companies doing the same. So I think there is a much positive environment today. It's recognized by companies that well-being of all, and certainly for women, is more important, and they are doing things that would indeed help there.
That's nice to know. Education plus having these kind of communities is definitely a good step. Normally, what we hear in the media, unless we actively search, okay, what comes very easily if you look for any women centric, how to adapt to the workplace and things like that, you see organizations focusing on just two areas, right? One is women in leadership, and they talk
Right.
about policies around maternity leave, paternity leave, whatever it is, essentially associated with the childbirth and those initial months kind of a phase. I see a problem in both because women in leadership is, yes, it's a very small percentage, and that percentage should increase, and that focus is required, I understand. And similarly, the early, that birth stage, the childbirth, that phase, both are required. But the vast majority of women in workforce are not in these two stages.
Yeah.
They are not maybe looking for leadership, but they are definitely interested in their career growth. Okay.
Right.
But they may not yet be in that early, motherhood state, or maybe they have gone past it. If you look at the bulk of the women at workforce, as organizations, are we kind of focusing only on these two other small percentages? Do we kind of ignore the masses amongst women?
Right. So, in my experience, I don't think there is a lack of focus on the masters, as you call it,
Hmm.
the not the leaders, not the ones who are having childbirth. I think there is and it's a broad brush that I'm using,
Hmm.
is that there is a heightened awareness around the dominant set of biases that exist in the ways we work
Hmm.
against women, right? I mean, just to illustrate, I mean, one of the big things that India, and I think, and I'm talking about as an India workforce in general,
Hmm.
is I believe, one of the strongest barrier to us achieving dominance in this whole world of AI and automation is lack of enough women in technology,
Hmm.
right? And this comes in right from the childhood of a girl child,
Right.
the choices she makes, how she's guided by her own family in terms of the choices she picks up, and thereafter in organizations, how they are selected, right? In good old days, when I say good old days, I'm just meaning 2 years ago, if you're a SAP consultant, and if you were not willing to travel, I'm sorry, that's not a career for you,
Right.
right?
Correct. Correct.
That's how it used to work, and therefore a woman would not be selected or hired. And these are called systemic biases,
Right.
right? It's the way you hired, where you looked for candidate. It meant that only a man would get selected. So I think there has been recognition of these,
Hmm.
right? Across at all levels. There is a lot of movement done by many companies, we ourselves, and the IBMs and the Microsoft, and a lot of the tech organizations saying, hey, we can't be doing like this. We need to kind of go down and examine how is it that we can encourage more and more women coming into technology field, and look at all dimensions of biases that
Hmm.
exist, right from the family, in the career choices, to institutions, etc., etc. The non-tech environment as well, there is a recognition that if 50% of your workforce, potential workforce, that's the population split
Hmm.
across in India, right? If 50% of the people are not enabled, you won't be able to power through the aspirations of growth, etc., right? So there is a business need, if you like, and I like business need because that makes
Yeah.
economics always pushes things to our favor in what we're trying to solve,
Right.
and therefore we're seeing that companies are consciously doing this.
Hmm.
There is a more esoteric reason, and there is, I say esoteric, there are fewer organizations who recognize this, who are more mature and so on. And the fact, what they recognize is a workplace with real diversity, right, of men and women, and it goes, the diversity sense goes even higher in terms of LGBT plus and mental health, people with different abilities, special abilities. But even if you look at the gender, they recognize that workplace becomes that much more enjoyable
Hmm.
if we are able to create a space where people of both the genders, feel successful, and those are the companies are thriving that much more. Right? There is enough research to point out. For example, companies which create what is called an inclusive culture
Hmm.
tend to create six times more innovation. They create, two times higher profitability
Hmm.
and profitable growth. So things like that. I think there is enough longitudinal studies done to point out that a good inclusive environment where men and women thrive together tend to create better business results, right? And therefore, those companies, or smaller numbers, who are looking to what can I do to make every individual in this organization, men and women alike, feel successful, and they are not only tackling the systemic bias, unconscious bias that might stay in the way they work, but they go to the heart of that culture
Hmm.
and push the leaders to become more inclusive, more accountable for inclusion. And those are the very few companies. Like I said, about 3 to 5% of the companies typically operate at this level, but they tend to do best. And in my aspiration is that actually every organization can be that, right?
True.
Because it's the simple idea that we create an inclusive environment. It doesn't require rocket science. We know that if we all work happily, we'll do better results. So it's a good result for everyone,
I am
right?
reminded of the famous byline in that ad, "Ye dil mange more."
Bilkul.
Yeah. And I'm
Absolutely.
reminded of your comment in this report where you talk
Yeah.
about cultural shifts required, and you have referred to the need for respecting boundaries of work hours. So
Yeah.
Monish, I remember when, maybe the last 20, 30 years when the IT opened up and we started going abroad, many of our organization had this so-called cross-cultural training programs, remember, where we were
Right.
told what to talk or what not to talk with Germans, what to talk with English, what not to talk with Americans, all these
Yeah.
trainings, and it was mandatory to attend these trainings before one went. I am not saying that those trainings converted you to become culturally sensitive, but at least it
Right.
made some, what do you say, made you a bit more aware that there is such a thing. So do you think this
Right.
kind of a cultural shift that we are talking about involves some of these trainings, making it very explicit? For example, all are familiar with bad estimates or ineffective planning leading to last minute delays, all nighters, and these expectations for everyone, men or women, all alike, to be checking email or messenger. We conveniently do we ignore these? The culture that we have of CCing everybody on mails,
Yeah.
meetings for meeting's sake, meetings like Jugad is kind of so valued. Planning
Yeah.
is seen as somebody who has a lot of time, does it, and it's kind of looked down upon. I can go on and on. These are all part of the culture.
Exactly.
So, do
Exactly.
you think there is a possibility of being made aware through some kind of sessions, whether it is senior leadership, whether it is junior resources, whomever, men and women alike? Because even women do the stereotypes of men. Women
Yeah.
do not acknowledge that there may be men in the team who have to take care of babies at home. That is
Yeah. Right.
happening, and it may be a small percentage. So, this to avoid the stereotyping, do you think those kind of sessions, etc., are we there?
Taking your example of the cultural sensitivity workshops, and as you said, that I mean, it helped to some extent, but it didn't necessarily prepare you fully, right? And
Yes.
I think it goes to the human behavior that we all wake up saying, okay, tomorrow onwards I'll be only eating healthy. I said that to myself a few days ago and reached out for a samosa just the day after, right? So that's how behavior changes. It's tough, and
It's
it
tough.
doesn't
Yeah.
happen just because we decide. So the real aspect there, and we should, and companies are doing awareness sessions and so on, and it helps because it creates a dialogue, but it doesn't create change.
Hmm.
What creates change is two dominant things, right? If I were to put it, one is the leaders' resolve, and when I say leaders, is the CEO, is the leadership per se, who recognize that the ways of working needs to be done. Culture changes from top down,
Hmm.
right? it doesn't change bottom up.
Correct.
It can get worse bottom up, but it is top down. Any change is top down. So we need that as a very dominant one, and along with that intent is about role modeling, right?
Right.
The leaders walk the talk. If they say we need planning, then when they see a jugaad kind of document put up, they throw it out, saying sorry, that's not rigor enough, or right, it's not been thought about enough. And that's why fewer companies do it, because the leaders intend to solve it. The companies who are mature and who are thinking, and maturity doesn't mean large. I mean,
Yeah.
their leaders have reached a point that they appreciate these deep principles, and they realize that they need to shape their organization differently, and therefore they're doing the right thing. And I've known of small companies, big companies alike. So that is one. The second thing that needs to go hand in hand is all behavior shaping things or actions and policies need to be aligned to it. For example, talked about people doing jugaad and getting and delivering what is required. What does the performance management system do, right? What does it finally value? So I know of good old days, and it's not now, and I don't think it happens enough, or at least it's not consciously, is that in good old days, while whatever the performance management system might say, but the individual is rated on, oh, this guy worked so long, right? I mean, we told him to go to this remote place, and he dropped everything and went, despite the fact he was getting married in 2 months' time, something like that,
Right.
right?
Right.
And those values would have a disproportionate impact on the performance, and the person will earn more salary. Guess what? You start rewarding these negative behaviors, those biases, if you like.
Yeah.
So if you want to change that behavior, change your measures and
Right.
reward those changes, in that manner. So start rewarding people who have done on time rather than people who have solved a crisis, right? People who averted crisis, give them a reward, right? Which is a
Correct.
tough one to
Correct.
do, but
Yeah.
that's the way mature systems operate. So it's really about these two. It's about role modeling leaders and doing that, and the reward systems, the performance systems. If you start doing that, then the rest of the organization then uphold this. Then the people down the line use this to change their work and use technologies to streamline, blah blah blah. But these are two strongest culture shaping initiatives that is hard to do, right? Because it's tough to do this for any company, but is as simple as that if you think about
Correct.
it.
And I completely agree. These two empowers people, not just women, empowers everybody to say no to nonsense.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
What we all in our minds know is this is not correct. This kind of demand should not be there, and we keep quiet because that is the culture. That is what is happening top down. So I completely agree. Yes. So Monish, I wanted to ask you, what is your message to women? We were looking at what organizations could do, right? But I'm keen to also know, based on your
Yeah,
experience, what is your message to women
right.
in terms of what they should or should not do,
Yeah,
to get aligned to this culture, to get aligned to this kind of
yeah,
a thought process in the short term, in the long term? What do you think? What would your
yeah,
inputs be?
yeah. Let me use what I have seen women do in these times, right? And that's one of the things I started looking out for. Okay, what are the so-called good practices that women are doing? And I think one dominant thing women have done, and therefore I would recommend to your listeners to do the same, is talk about it, right? Recognize this pattern that's happening around you, and talk to your colleagues, or talk to your peers, men and women alike, including to your manager, and so on, to help point out where you are. I think that's not been done enough. I think there is a fear of retaliation. There is a fear of that will I be truly understood. But the purpose of talking out is really acknowledging even to yourself,
Right.
verbalizing it, saying, "Ki, indeed, I have a challenge." Remember, I mentioned that women are getting feeling more and more isolated as a consequence.
Yeah.
This will start taking out that isolation.
And
Right?
there
So
is
that's
no
the
need to
point
feel
one.
apologetic about it or just stating the fact
Exactly.
is. It's a big step.
Exactly,
Yeah.
stating the fact that this is what's happening, this is where we are, and you would find men and women, and this has been my experience, who are sensitized to these things. They recognize that this is what's happening, and I think this dialogue helps to bring things clear and present rather than, oh, it's one of those uncomfortable things we don't talk about, right? So I think that's one. And in that, talking about at a workplace, I would say, talking about at home with the spouse, for example, to pick this up, the example I gave
Yeah.
about how the two sat down, build a list, things like that, if that's a possibility. But at workplace, the talking about is also talking about the discomfort one has, working to the schedule that is pushed onto them. The real issue at workplace is just this, right? That I don't have any control on my time. So
Yeah.
talk about that, and share that. So that's the first thing. The second thing I think that is there is to be able to then seek few things, which is your right as an employee, right? Your right to seek a career that you wish to build, right?
Right.
And I'm using the word right because it's equally available to both men and women,
Yes.
right? And therefore, women don't need to feel guilty saying, "Oh, I'm not putting in enough time," or "I have these constraints, and I should live up to that." We should stand up and say, "Look, this is an opportunity that I'm seeking. And for this, therefore, I need help from the organization, from my team. And sometimes it's as simple as working with the team. So I'll just illustrate with an example. This is another one that I saw happening is that a woman colleague who was stretched in a similar manner, she decided to work with her manager to say, look, I may not respond to you during the day, for those, 5 or 6 hours. But you know what? I will respond to you when my kids go to sleep. I'm happy to work, So I'll work from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. because that's very convenient for me, and I'll do that. But during the day, I would not. And the manager is absolutely fine because it doesn't matter. And it's not just isolated now; it's been happening many years. So I think so that desire to build that career would mean that both manager and the team, they find a hack to deal with it, right?
Correct.
And sometimes it needs to go to the organization, but I think 80% of the issues can be managed between the team and the women colleague. So that's the second thing, is that go and solve for it as a consequence. The third is, and I think it's a fundamental shift to see, is I think it's about women really stepping back and seeing that what is it that they wish to be, and what's the kind of career they want to build, what's the kind of a life they want to lead, more at a personal vision level, because that will help them to clarify what's important, what's not important, right? And I'm using this specifically to speak to the point that you said, and in our research pointed out that significant portion of women are 75% are likely to leave the organization they are in next 2 years, right? And I'm speaking to that in particular is that step back and think about what do you really want, right? And this would be mean by way of a career, by way of a family, by way of your own well-being, all put together. Build a map around what's important, clarify your own values around what's important, what's less important, and then make choices around whether your organization you're in fits in. If it does, then talk around with your colleagues, with the HR, with your leaders, to help create that environment to suit what you need. If your organization, after doing all this discussion, including with your manager and your talent leaders, if it doesn't work, then by all means look for something that fits you. But before leaving your job, or before considering leaving a job as a consequence of this pressure, step back, right? Step back and think, and do some personal vision along with it. And maybe you have a peer that you can do along with it, so that both of you can
Yeah.
sit down together and really think. Do the same with your spouse, just sitting down and saying, hey, both of us are working. How do we manage this? So I think that is a very important aspect to be done in the long run. The first two ideas are more here and now that we could.
I completely agree with you. And in all of these ideas, whether it is in the short term or the long term, what I would like to, underline, highlight, put it in bold, as somebody who has gone through this and have interacted with a lot of women who have gone through this, is most often what holds women back is the fact that, I am the superwoman, I will find solution myself. Okay. And when you are sleep deprived because your kid is not sleeping, or you are facing a safety issue in the sense you do not know who will take care of the child if you have to go to office, at that time that
Yeah.
problem looks so big that it is really difficult to step back and think, what is it that I want for me in my career? It looks very selfish because of our upbringing,
Yeah.
because of our societal norm. So, the most important underlying point is that please acknowledge you can't do it alone and you need to reach out. So, Monish was talking about whether it's a peer, whether it's a manager, whether it's a spouse, but you need a community of people with whom you talk about this. Okay, so that it is possible for you to step back and think 3 years or 4 years later, whereas you do not know how to handle your today.
No, absolutely. I have seen some very, very bright women colleagues and friends who went out of the workforce for choices depending on
Hmm.
that here and now situation. And in hindsight, many of them, and my own spouse included, there's a sense of regret that maybe I should have done something else to deal with those challenges at that time. And I think that's the piece that I think gray hair helps you to learn in hindsight, right? But I think
Yeah.
the opportunity is
Yeah.
to look at it in a holistic manner and figure out a path that you don't give up on your career. You may take a break if that works, but you're really
Correct.
thinking through your
Yeah.
choices from a long term perspective rather than responding to the urgent.
And with help, involve more people to
Absolutely, absolutely.
facilitate this decision making. And Monish, one question I'm very tempted to ask, okay? What is the impact of this report on you personally? What is it that you decided to change when it came to your own house or workplace, in
Right,
the sense as a person, not as an
right.
organization, as a policy, but when it comes to you?
That's a lovely question. I've been a sort of a fanatic woman supporter for a longest time. I remember, and what this kind of got me is this whole militant drive to look at it for my own organization, for my own household, and so on. But one thing that has really it's made me angry that much more, and I feel that as organizations, as men, we haven't done enough, despite the fact that this has been on for a while. So I am talking about it. I'm in my dialogue with my own spouse, and basically, there's both of us, and our kids are out, and she has her own business, and I'm part of an organization. So both of us lead terribly busy lives, but we manage with taking turns in cleaning utensils, making breakfast and lunch, and so on. So that is not an issue, but as much as both of us talk about it and saying in her own work, how can she do things for her own employees that helps her,
Hmm.
and so I'm a bit of a militant drive to drive this messaging across to everyone who cares to listen, and that's what I've been doing. I must have been invited to speak to companies, and I've taken each and every invitation. And normally I'm cautious about where I go and talk, but each and every invitation to talk about this report and talk about what the company should do. So yeah, it's where I am. It's made me angry, and I'm trying to push and do what I can to do even a small bit of a difference if I can.
Good. Each one of us, if we decide, yeah, where we can make a difference, yes, that is powerful.
Thank you.
So, Monish, anything else that you would like to add? Any parting thoughts? Anything you wanted to share which we have not covered?
I have really enjoyed this conversation. I am so glad what you're doing, and your listeners will, I'm sure, are deriving value out of each of your conversations. Thank you for inviting me for a dialogue and being the
Thank you
first
so
male
much.
privilege. I'm really honored. Yeah. So thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
doing
It
this.
was lovely, Monish. Thank you. Do visit my website, thenewindianwoman.com, for related blogs on this topic. Of course, I would love to hear from you. You could rate or leave a comment in your podcast app or write to me at krishna@thenewindianwoman.com. Remember, You are what you want to be, and the time starts now.